Welcome to This Explainer. I am seriously so excited to guide you through today's topic, mostly because it flips a really common cultural assumption completely upside down. We live in a world where millions of people absolutely love discussing football stats, tracking rivalries, wearing their team's colors, the whole shebang. But what about the folks who just completely ignore the big game? Society usually assumes they just haven't given it a real chance, or maybe they just have a passive lack of interest. But the research tells a totally different, incredibly fascinating story. So let's dive right into this. Choosing not to watch football is actually a highly active psychological choice, driven by some very distinct mental traits. It's a specific mindset, and today we're going to unpack exactly how that mind works. Now, to really understand this, we've got to look at how different brains actually seek out their rewards. And this comparison brilliantly illustrates the core difference. On one side, you've got the traditional sports fan. They often get this massive dopamine hit from external validation, right? It's that feeling of belonging to a huge crowd, wearing the jersey, riding the shared highs and lows of the team. But the non-spectator, they're operating on a completely different frequency. They are literally wired to seek their dopamine through internal, personal progress. They vastly prefer the deep, quiet satisfaction of their own focus and their own real-world achievements, rather than absorbing all that external energy from a stadium. So here is our roadmap for this explainer. Think of it like a field guide to the non-spectator mind. We're going to cover 1. The non-spectator mindset. 2. Lacking vicarious emotion. 3. Seeking diversified stimulation. 4. The low arousal preference. And finally, 5. Protecting your focus. As we roll through these, keep an eye out and see which of these psychological archetypes fits you, or maybe your friends, the absolute best. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the non-spectator mindset. Like we said, it's an active choice. Moving right along to Section 2, lacking vicarious emotion. This is where we meet our first archetype, the self-focused thinker. Let's break down this concept of vicarious emotion. Basically, it's defined as feeling excitement or thrill through someone else's success or actions. So, when a striker scores that incredible winning goal, the crowd absolutely erupts because they are experiencing that victory vicariously. But our first archetype, the self-focused thinker, they simply aren't wired for this. Actually, scratch that, it's more like their brain just does not process the success of a total stranger on a screen as a personal victory. Because they lack that vicarious emotional response, they literally do not get a thrill from an athlete's win. The psychological mechanism just isn't there. Now, while the thinker's brain lacks that specific wiring from the get-go, our second archetype, the disillusioned realist, might have actually loved the game at some point in their lives. But eventually, they looked around at the relentless marketing and the intense, almost cult-like worship of players and realized, this kind of lacks deeper meaning. The crucial takeaway here is that they have this stark, sudden realization. Cheering for strangers on a field does absolutely nothing to help them grow. It certainly doesn't pay their bills or fix anything in their own lives. For them, it's just an empty transaction. And that stark realization leads us straight into existential detachment. This is a state of feeling entirely disconnected from an activity because it lacks personal meaning or growth. I absolutely love this phrase because it perfectly captures that sensation of just walking away from all the noise. The disillusioned realist experiences profound existential detachment from sports culture. They detach because they demand that their time and energy be spent on things that actually foster their own personal evolution. Up next is Section 3, seeking diversified stimulation. Let's introduce the redirected mind. So this highly active, driven archetype looks at a standard football match and finds the back and forth entirely repetitive. Instead of passive viewing, the redirected mind requires what psychologists call diversified stimulation. Simply put, they are actively seeking out activities that offer a really unique mix of mastery, novelty, and complexity. Their brain is just hungry for the kind of dynamic engagement that a structured, repetitive sports game simply cannot provide. They don't want to just sit and watch, they want to engage their brain in a completely multifaceted way. What does diversified stimulation actually look like in the real world? Well, it's highly active. The redirected mind is naturally drawn to designing structures or systems. They want to be building tangible, real-world projects. They get totally energized by solving complex, novel problems. This perfectly matches the productive energy of a mind that craves personal mastery way more than passive spectating. They are essentially taking those hours that other people spend watching sports and redirecting them into creating and problem-solving in their own lives. It's a real game changer for them. Slowing things down a bit for Section 4, the low arousal preference. This is where we meet the peace seeker.
I want you to just pause and think about this for a second. Have you ever been to a major sporting event, or even just a super crowded sports bar, and felt completely drained by that massive wall of sound? Why does stadium noise and the sheer chaos of fan environments completely overwhelm some people's nervous systems while totally energizing others? Well, it's not just a matter of taste, guys, it's actually biology.
The answer lies in something called the low arousal preference. This is a very specific nervous system trait that strongly favors calm environments. The noise and the unpredictability associated with football fans can be incredibly overwhelming for the peace seeker. But here is the really cool so what that you should take away from this. Preferring a low arousal environment is absolutely not a weakness. In fact, research links this exact preference to a very high level of emotional intelligence.
This creates such a stark, beautiful contrast. A person with high emotional intelligence and a low arousal preference vastly prefers thinking and observing calmly over, shouting their lungs out in a chaotic crowd. The internal peace of the non-fan allows them to process the world deeply, whereas the external chaos of the stadium is just a literal biological mismatch for their nervous system. They are protecting their peace, literally by design.
All right, bringing the energy back up for Section 5, protecting your focus. Enter the honest realist. The honest realist holds a very blunt but undeniably powerful perspective. They believe that watching millionaires chase a ball is a seriously poor emotional investment, especially when they are still out there working to achieve their own dreams. They fiercely guard their time. They look at a 3-hour football match and they see 3 hours they could be using to hit their own milestones. They completely refuse to invest their emotional capital into an entertainment product when their own life demands that exact same energy. And that brings us right to the overarching thesis of our entire explainer today. When you look at the whole picture, the psychology of the non-spectator really boils down to this: choosing to evolve and build their own life rather than escaping into a game. Whether they're the self-focused thinker who just lacks that vicarious emotion, the redirected mind craving complex puzzles, the peace seeker needing a calm environment, or the honest realist fiercely protecting their time, all of these traits point toward one thing: building an authentic, self-directed life. Which leaves us with this final, absolutely vital question to reflect on. Look at your own habits and the habits of the people around you. Are you escaping into the game, or are you actively building your own life? Understanding the distinct psychology of non-fans really helps us all evaluate where we're spending our own emotional energy and our time. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I really hope you found decoding this mindset as absolutely fascinating as I did. Keep learning, keep building, and I will see you next time.